Timmy. How are you?
I'm well, Dan. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Where are you right now?
I'm driving home. I just did 4 days in Bristol doing the trade deadline, so the pressure's off. Now I'm driving home, and we'll start the post-deadline part of our program. So,
is there any ballpark you haven't been to?
no, I've been to all of them. In fact, I've covered a game in 55 different ballparks. Covered a game in 55, including the old Metropolitan Stadium in Minnesota and 3 Atlanta ballparks. So, yeah, I keep count of stuff like that because I don't go anywhere else and I don't do anything else. So that's what I have to collect, are ballparks.
What's your favorite piece of sports memorabilia you have?
I don't have anything, Dan. I really don't. I don't collect anything, but I did. This is going to sound terrible. I went to the White House for a luncheon, and I sat next to Stan Musial at the luncheon. Stan Musial and Brooks Robinson sat next to me. How great is that? So Stan Musial says to me, "Would you like an autographed picture?" And even though I don't collect anything, because that's not what I do, of course I say, yes, I would love one. And 2 days later, an autographed picture of Stan Musial showed up at my house. And I went like 2 years before I saw him again. And the first thing he said to me was, "Did you like the picture?" And I thought, oh, my gosh, Stan Musial has got so many other things to worry about and to think about. Remembered me being sent a picture and thought enough of it 2 years later to ask me about it. That's who Stan Musial was, one of the great all-time players, and along with Brooks Robinson, the two nicest superstar players I've ever met in my life.
All right, I have a stat of the day. I'm gonna bring you the stat of the day, Tim, and I'm sure you're gonna have something to add to this when we do it. Seton, hit the music for stat of the day.
Start of the day! Start of the day! Start of the day! Start of the day! Here comes the start of the day!
Brian Dozier was traded from the Twins to the Dodgers yesterday. Since the start of the 2016 season, Dozier leads all second basemen in both home runs, 92, and RBIs, 244. That's your stat of the day.
Start of the day! Start of the day! Start of the day! Start of the day! Here comes the start of the day!
Anything you would like to add to that, Tim?
I think I've got this right, that Dozier and Manny Machado have exactly the same number of home runs over the last 4 years, I want to say. And they got traded to the same team, and now they're going to be playing shortstop and second base next to each other, and they have the exact same number of homers. And I think, though, that total, 143, is fourth most among infielders in that time, and now those two will be playing together.
And also, Dozier is a Gold Glove winner, had a great second half of the season. I know we always focus on the bigger names, and Harper didn't get dealt, but, you know, sort of these secondary trades, those are the ones that in September and even October, that's when they sort of surface, where you go, okay, that's why they got them. But I'm curious, was there ever a framework for a trade for Bryce Harper by any team?
It's my understanding that it never got to that point. Now, famously on Monday night, the Nationals just looked around to see what was out there. But I reported at the time they were just seeing if they would get overwhelmed at the last minute. That certainly did not happen. So I don't think a framework was ever in place that, yes, we were going to send Harper to the Indians for a package like this, and then somebody backed out. My understanding is it never got that far.
But that's what I'm curious about, Tim, because it felt like a lot of these national insiders, including Buster Olney, they felt like this is like a foregone conclusion. This is more likely than not he was going to be dealt. But how is it that everybody thought he was going to be dealt, but we didn't know what anybody was offering to the Nationals?
Well, I didn't think he was ever going to be dealt. So I'm in a different camp there because in in my research and my reporting, I never got anybody to tell me that, yeah, there's something going on here. And I think the reason people said it's going to happen is because the Nationals are in so much trouble. The guy's a free agent at the end of the year, so it makes sense to get something for him now rather than get a draft choice for him, say, in November. So I think that's why, but I never saw or heard any direct link to a team with other names involved.
What role, we're talking to Tim Kurkjian from ESPN, what role does Scott Boras play in Bryce Harper staying, or what's more important to him, that he stays where he may want to or that he becomes the highest paid player in baseball? And maybe you can have both here, but it feels like that's what you're bringing in Scott Boras. You're not getting a hometown discount, it feels.
Right. Now, he does have a great relationship, Boras does, with the Nationals and vice versa. And he has Steven Strasburg, who told Scott Boras, I want to stay here. I don't want to go out on the free agent market. And they signed him to a long-term extension for an enormous amount of money without Strasburg ever getting to free agency. I do not see that happening with Bryce Harper. I think he's going to go out there and look around. But Scott Boras will say, what do you want? And Bryce will probably say, I want to see what's out there. And that's why I think there's a really good chance he's going to leave the Nationals. But I think we still have to wait and see what happens the last couple months here before we're going to know who's interested in him and is there any chance he's going to stay in Washington.
I love asking this question. I don't know if there's a correct answer or a bad answer. But if I gave you Harper, I'm going to take Trout out of this. I gave you Mookie Betts, I gave you Harper, and I gave you Shohei Ohtani or somebody else. Now, I'm talking about young stars here. You got to give them a max contract here. Who are you going to invest in?
Well, that's a great question. I would go with Harper first, barely over Mookie Betts, and barely over Manny Machado. And when I say barely, if anyone picked the other two, there would be no argument here. I still just think, Dan, there's something about this guy that is different than others. And I think his wildly competitive nature, which sometimes gets him in trouble, is still going to lead to great, great things for him. Mookie Betts' defense and his speed adds to the equation, certainly. But I still think Harper is right there with all the young players, except for Mike Trout, who's in a different category than anybody else.
What other teams did well prior to the trade deadline?
Well, the Red Sox did well. The Yankees did really well. The Cubs did well getting Hamels. The Dodgers did well getting Machado and Dozier. And I love what the Brewers did. The Brewers, thinking out of the box, said we can't find a starting pitcher, so we're just going to outslug everybody. So they got Mike Moustakas and Jonathan Scope. Scope's a great defensive second baseman on days he plays there, but he'll play some shortstop. I also love what the Diamondbacks did. Eduardo Escobar is really going to help them, especially with Jake Lamb being hurt. And those two relievers they got yesterday, Ziegler and Diekman, are really going to fortify that bullpen. And you know, Dan, you win in October with a deep, versatile bullpen. So there's so many teams that did well and so few teams that did poorly. I think that just shows you again what a great trading deadline this was. So many moves, so many interesting moves that lasted almost a month.
But you talked about the bullpen. Explain what the logic is of the Astros obtaining the suspended pitcher, Roberto Osuna, that you take that PR hit for the first couple of days. But this is a team that already won a World Series. I understand, like the Cubs brought in Aroldis Chapman. They hadn't won a World Series. The Astros have won a World Series. That's why I was surprised that they brought in Roberto Osuna, who's been suspended for domestic violence.
Right. Dan, I'm with you completely on this. I was confused by this move. I'm uncomfortable with this move. I'm not sure I understand this move. Now, look, they're the defending world champs. They've got every box checked except for a late inning reliever, and they did a very controversial thing by trading for someone who's suspended for 75 games, and that's huge baggage, what he's suspended for. They're going to have to explain this to their fans. They're going to have to explain it to their teammates, and I'm not sure how they're going to do that. But we know how fandom works. We know how baseball works. If that kid comes in and is great, and believe me, his stuff is great, maybe all will be forgiven. But I'll be uncomfortable with that, too, because I'm not sure you can easily forget at least the charges that we think are happening here.
And the reason why I singled it out yesterday is obviously with domestic violence, I didn't know you could trade a guy who had been suspended.
Yeah, and I also don't understand, Dan, how a guy who's suspended for this is allowed to play in the postseason, where a guy suspended for PEDs is not allowed to play in the postseason. I understand being suspended for PEDs is not a good thing, but I don't understand the distinction between the two.
I didn't even think of that. I was just curious because you can't trade a player who's injured, I don't think. Can you? So can you you can trade a player who's been suspended?
Yeah, you can trade a player who is on suspension for a domestic policy violation, and that player is eligible for the postseason during the year in which he was suspended. And again, I'm confused by that, and I believe that's a rule that baseball needs to look into and ask, is this the right thing we should be doing here?
If you had to redo your World Series picks, would you?
Well, I think it was a long time ago, the Cubs to play the Astros. I've changed my mind, Dan, about 50 times since then, which, of course, is the ultimate beauty of baseball, whereas you never change your basketball pick. It's always Golden State and Cleveland, although obviously not anymore. So if I could change it, I would say the Red Sox are going to play the Dodgers in the World Series, and I might change that again like in a couple of days, because baseball is so great, it does not allow itself to be easily predicted. So we'll see how the rest of the season plays out. It will be fascinating to watch.
One other thing, the inappropriate tweet problem that baseball has. Is baseball addressing this? Yes,
apparently so, that baseball is going to make sure its clubs and its players know, number one, don't ever tweet anything like that. Don't ever think like that. Don't be stupid enough to do anything like that. And if you have, then get some sort of expert in to make sure that is scrubbed away somehow. I'm the worst ever at technology. I don't understand how anything works beyond my cell phone, and I really stink with that also. So I don't know how this works, but baseball has to understand in a 10-day period when 3 good young players are in the middle of this, that the players and the teams had better be more diligent about educating players to, A, never say or do those things, and if you have been that stupid, find someone to help you eradicate it somehow and educate you about that.
Safe travels, Tim. Great to catch up with you. Thank you.
Okay, Dan, I'll see you.
That's Tim Kurkjian.
For more Dan Patrick Show, tune to Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV or download the Dan Patrick Show app.